2020, the year of some of the best prediction videos we have ever seen, and the year of the greatest amount of disappointments. First Baselworld being cancelled, then Rolex leaving Baselworld, then Rolex postponing their launch of new pieces, and now, as of the 1st of September, we shall be hearing what they decide to do. If they do intend to bring new watches to their catalogue, we don't know just yet. It's been quite a disheartening year, but the predictions have been superb, some of the most varied and engaging that we have ever seen. Because 2020 is such a gorgeous number. Because it's rounded and it's an anniversary, you can expect all sorts of changes, and that was the plan until the inevitable happened. So everyone is pretty much sick and tired of making expectation and prediction videos. I was too. I think over the last few months I've made about 3 on various occasions. Some have been more believable than others, but this one is going to be grounded. We're going to look at what we can expect realistically from the brand. A lot of these ideas aren't mine, they aren't original. Many have been cited by many people in the community, so maybe that allows for more validity in this discussion. But after a bit of investigation and seeing what the sister company has released lately, maybe that's a clue for what we will be seeing from the Rolex brand. Let's go back a few years to what I believe was Baselworld 2018. What did we see that were the 2 biggest releases from the families? We saw Tudor bring out the GMT Pepsi variant, 42mm case, looks great, accessible, fantastic. Next to them, we see Rolex bring out the Pepsi GMT on a Jubilee bracelet, stainless steel. Was this a coincidence? It's a bit too close to be a coincidence. Okay. Well, let's pretend that it was. The watches look very similar and they're aimed at 2 different areas of the marketplace. Very well rounded for that reason. And then 2019 arrives and we see that Tudor releases the steel and gold Black Bay chronograph. Next to that, we see Rolex release the 43mm Sea Dweller in two-tone. Is this also a coincidence? Don't know so much anymore. Maybe I am just clutching at straws, but I hope you see where I'm getting at here. What did we see released from Tudor this year? Well, the Black Bay Navy Blue. And I do firmly believe that this was a litmus test of sorts. This watch is relatively affordable. It addresses many areas that enthusiasts wanted. Straight after the release of this watch, did we hear that Rolex had plans in the pipeline to bring out new watches in September? Was that a coincidence? Don't know so much. So does this mean then, looking at how these 2 brands have worked side by side, that we might in fact see something blue from the Rolex family? Okay, that's a good starting point. Most of us in the community have been talking about the release of a new Submariner, with the updated movement, with the case being tapered down ever so slightly. We must bear in mind that 2010 was the first time that we saw the super case introduced with these models. So 10 years later, the watch does deserve a facelift at this point. Could it then mean that they decide to not only taper down the case, the lugs, put a new movement in the watch, but also bring it out in blue? Yes, we have seen a fully blue Submariner before, white gold, Smurf. This one in steel with a different color palette would appeal to a lot of people. And when we think from a business point of view, what has been going on recently? We know that the Rolex factory had to shut down for a long period of time. Considering all that's been going on at the moment, this is a very practical approach and a decent result. If the sister company did it, why can't Rolex do the same? Just the thought of a blue Submariner is very exciting because there is so much room for opportunity when it comes to color choices. Are we going for a more pale baby blue? Are we going for a more richer royal blue? Something a bit more neutral, a pastel finish? It's difficult to clarify, but there are so many opportunities. And maybe we are completely wrong and we see blue used on the Daytona or the Explorer, for example. You never really know. But the fingers do point to the Submariner as the watch that's getting an overhaul this year. Whether that means that the watch is just tapered down ever so slightly with a new movement, whether it means that it gets a whole new color, nobody knows. If we are to look at it realistically, all Rolex would really need to do is bring down the case size and introduce all the features that we've wanted. They don't have to change the color of the watch, but it would be very nice. In this pairing that we're looking at now, on the right hand side you see the more standard piece that we now know. On the left-hand side, took a bit more of a severe turn when it comes to the lugs, also reducing the overall width of the crown and the crown guards. Maybe this style rubs a lot of people the wrong way because it is going back to the traditional forms. This is a little bit extreme in appearance. And maybe what we will get is just the GMT format that we've seen with some of the newest watches being tapered down very slightly, where it's almost unnoticeable. All of us just want a little bit more fidelity with these pieces. Moving away from the Submariner, next piece on the line is the Explorer. This is another area where they could scale the watch down ever so slightly and have a lot more fun looking at those smaller details. In this exhibit that we're looking at now, I took the 39mm format. I brought the scale of the case down to about 37, could say 37.5. Kept the bracelet at 20mm but took down the width of the lugs on the inside. And then to complete the image, looking at all of the numerals, the Arabics at the quarters, shrunken them ever so slightly, bringing them in closer. If we were to look at the current 39mm Explorer, we see how the width of the baton does measure the same as the width of the Arabics. But if the Arabic's proportions are shrunken in, it does allow your eye to break away from the batons and the numerals very easily at a glance. And in a way, this watch goes full circle back to what we remember from the 5 and 6 digit 36mm variants. This could be a very wholesome recreation of that icon, now being called the 214270 Mark III. 37mm, maybe the new caliber as well. The proportions ever so sweeter and well balanced. The greatest topic of discussion around the Explorer is the polar variant. Many have been talking about a white dial, and it is something that they have been lacking. Does a watch of this caliber deserve a white dial? I believe it does. Being a watch that is inspired by mountaineering and traveling across the poles, a white dial is acceptable. But there is one key area that people fail to identify, and that is when you're dealing with a white dial watch, legibility can be difficult, especially when you're dealing with white gold and stainless steel components. Something that's highly polished would make reading very difficult in direct light. So to further improve the reading experience, very much like what we've seen with the Polar Explorer 2, adding darker, more emphasized lines around all of the batons, Arabics, hands, would improve this appearance, make it much more practical as a white dial watch. And could we say, even more believable. This is something that we could expect from the brand, and many would appreciate it. It's true to form next to what we have seen before. Call it an almost natural evolution. There's a possibility that they may not even go with a white dial and instead opt for a cream dial, say. That's also an exciting prospect. The off-white dial would also improve the reading experience, while also saving costs on the polished components. You don't necessarily have to worry about it as much. When looking at the Explorer, the one area that I think most of us in the community are more excited about is the thought of them bringing the scale down just enough that it completes the image of the piece. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's practical for those average wrists, but doesn't alienate the audience. And I'd love to see those indices less stretched and more condensed on the dial. Then there's been debate about the Milgauss. And this might be one of the most exciting additions that they could ever bring out. A piece that pays almost direct tribute to the history of the line. One of the most famous watches in the line, the 1019. The possibility of a watch with this caliber, with a turning bezel as well. Creatively, it's fantastic. And these renders come courtesy of Monochrome watches. They have really gone to town with recreating these pieces. It's the contrast of those red accents. Red tips on the seconds hands, the thought of batons on a dial, with date-just hands. It's an oyster perpetual with an X factor, and we can look at this from both angles. In a way, it's very much like Rolex because it celebrates restraint, which is something that they definitely love doing. But the issue is, it's an almost direct replica of a classic, and very few watches in their line get that kind of treatment. Looking at the business side of things again, is the Milgauss as exciting as watches like the Explorer, as the Submariner? Would the everyday person understand what it is or what it represents? Probably not. In a way, you could look at these recreations as something that reinvigorates the Milgauss name, but it's also too obscure, so the chances of us seeing this is slim. It's too risky of an exercise. But since we are talking about the subject of blue, how amazing would it be if they decided to bring out a blue bezel with orange accents, keep the Z Blue Milgauss in their line but add an extra feature? And this is by far my favorite rendition of the presentation. It's vibrant, it's exciting, it calls back to their past references, but does also push it into the modern frame. And in the community, I think most of us would be very excited to see a watch like this released. The sad thing is, does it look like a modern Rolex to you? Does it look like a piece that strays a little bit too far away from the formula? In a different area, we start talking about watches that we believe might be discontinued, and some are believable, like possibly the Hulk Submariner or the Smurf. Both of them, possibly. If I'm not mistaken, the Smurf was one of the first pieces to be given the super case. Maybe as they phase out the Smurf Submariner, so they bring in a new blue variant with a stainless steel case and bracelet. That might be something else to consider. Other examples of pieces that could be removed from their catalogue: the Yacht-Master Ii. Not the most popular piece in their professional line. An amazing complication, but one that most don't find practical at all. The bonus is that it is very unique. Its presence is something else. But this could be a piece that we see the last of. Similar, the Milgauss could also be removed. We talk about the Milgauss being reintroduced with a fresh new look, but it could also be taken away from the catalogue, because these watches just aren't as popular as the other professionals in the line. And last, the Air King. Most of us know the new Air King to be a piece that's almost like a Frankenstein of parts. Taking the Mark I Explorer dial, also incorporating a pilot's watch, Flieger-inspired layout. It's true to form, pays tribute to those original watches made in the 40s, but similar to the Milgauss, it's a watch that is left out. It's a niche product in their catalogue. All of this is conjecture. There is no fact, there is no proof or evidence about any of this. Odds are we might be very disappointed. There is always room for optimism somewhere. Maybe we will just get 5 new renditions of Datejusts and Oyster Perpetuals, and the professional models, all we see is a facelifted Submariner. Like what has been said by many before, don't expect anything radical. Especially when we think about the state of the world and the state of industry. We should consider the brand choosing the safer options first, which is why the facelifted Submariner is probably the most obvious. But hey, that's how these predictions and expectations work. By all means, share what you would like to see, what other news you have heard. This is always a fun area of discussion where we get to flex our creative muscles a little bit, but always try to keep it grounded in realism.